Today we're going to practice creating a drawing that shows an insect. We're going to think about symmetry. We've talked about symmetry before. Remember that symmetry is when we have the same shapes, colors, and lines on two or more sides of an artwork. We're going to be drawing an insect first, and then we're going to talk about creating texture. When I want to make a drawing that has symmetry, a good way for me to do that is to fold my paper in half and use the center, this fold, as my line of symmetry. I want to make sure I'm drawing big, and I'm going to just start drawing with an oil pastel. You can use any materials you have. And I'm going to start with the head of the insect, and I'm going to make a line this way, and then I'm going to do my very best to make the same shape on the other side of my line of symmetry. Now I want to make some eyes. Then I'm going to be making the center abdomen part of the insect. So I'm going to bring the head line around, and now I'm going to draw the abdomen shape. And the abdomen shape is about like this. And then finally the thorax. So ants and wasps and other insects have these shapes. We have the head, the abdomen, and the thorax. A lot of times insects have wings, so I would like for my insect to also have wings. And I'm going to draw a line that goes this way towards the edge of the paper and then curves. And then I'm going to draw back to the point. And then I'm going to draw a smaller shape here. It's going to touch the body and come up. So we can see I don't have perfect symmetry. That's okay, nothing's perfect. I also want to be drawing legs. Recall that insects have 6 legs, and I'm going to attach those legs to the abdomen. I'm going to draw a leg this way and this way. Same thing on this side. And I want to do these as close to the same as I can on both sides. I drew 2 more legs, and then the next set of legs will be underneath the wings, and I'm just going to draw those very lightly. The last detail that I want to draw on my insect are antennae. Remember that insects have antennae. I'm going to draw one here and one here, doing my best to draw them the same and in the same place so I have symmetry. Now the drawing is ready for color. After the insect is drawn, I want to experiment with creating different textures. We're going to use watercolor paint in the class, and if you have some watercolor paint at home, you can use that. But we can also make different textures with drawing. On the wings, I'm going to make this texture, which is not really scales, but is just sort of a wavy texture on the wings. And since I started with a lighter color, I'm going to go ahead and make this a thicker, more solid line. And I'm going to make sure that I make the same texture on both wings. We can also make the texture kind of like we practiced with our or Wild Things with short lines. And I'm just making these short lines go in different directions. And this is going to create kind of a fuzzy texture on the abdomen. I'm also going to make a fuzzy, kind of prickly texture on the legs by making kind of a zigzag line. I'm going to do that on this side of the legs. And I'm using just some little diagonal lines and then some zigzag lines. And I'm going to go ahead and trace this outline of the legs too. If you don't have watercolor paint, let's finish with crayons, color pencils, markers, and let's try to make textures just with drawing. With watercolor paint, we're going to try some different ways to make textures. Before I get started painting, remember that with watercolor, we want to start with our lighter colors, yellow, orange, red. Then we can use our middle colors like green and brown, and then finish up with our darker colors, blue, purple, and the black. We want to make sure our watercolors stay nice and clean. I'm going to start with yellow, and I'm going to make the eyes, I'm going to paint the eyes yellow, and I'm just going to be using a nice smooth, even texture. Remember that watercolor paint is a light paint because water is what creates the paint, and the colors are what tint or color the paint. It should not be thick or sticky. And that's just a nice smooth texture. I know that the legs are going to be orange, so I'm going to go ahead and paint another smooth orange texture on the legs, and that's just getting my paint as even as I can get it. And we can see through the wings and just see those shapes of the legs underneath. I want to make my insect's head, abdomen, and thorax purple. So that's why I've waited for those. With the head, I'm going to use some scratching. So with scratching, we want to make a fairly smooth painted area first. And I'm going to paint this as evenly as I can. And before the paint dries, I want to create scratch marks using the end of the paintbrush. So after I've painted the head nice and evenly and as smoothly as I can, I'm going to turn my brush and now use the end of the brush. And I'm going to scratch. And hopefully we'll be able to see scratching. And I think I'm starting to see it where it looks like there's some darker lines where I'm scratching into that paint. And that's creating this scratching texture. I'm going to paint smoothly over this prickly or furry texture with my purple paint. And I'm going to try another kind of texture on the thorax, this end part of the insect. And that's going to be using a dry brush, which also creates a rough texture. With dry brush, I want to really touch my paintbrush down onto the paper towel that I have here and gently brush out. I'd like to remind students that we need to be very careful with our paintbrushes, and I like to think about using my paintbrush as if I were petting a grumpy cat. So when I pet a grumpy cat with my paintbrush, I don't want to do this because that cat is really going to be grumpy and might scratch and bite. What I want to do is really gently pet the grumpy cat. And if we treat our paintbrush like a grumpy cat, then we are going to really have a nice paintbrush when we're finished. So I'm going to go with my dry brush that I've really gently brushed out the water. So after I get the water brushed out of my paintbrush, I'm going to go back to the purple paint that I've already used, so it's already a little wet. And I'm just going to gently touch down. Now, when I use this color, we can see a scratchy, darker texture. And this is a dry brush, which creates this uneven texture. And I think I've done such a good job getting the water out that I can barely get enough paint. With watercolor paint, we never want to scoop out the paint. It should be lighter. I'm going to just give this purple paint one little drop of water, and then I'm going to gently dry the brush on this paper towel, and I'm going to go back because I do want just a little more paint. There. So today, with drawing and with watercolor paint, I've made a kind of a prickly, spiky texture. I've used this scratching to make a rougher texture, using wavy lines to make a wavy texture, the dry brush to make this rougher texture, and then just painting as I normally would carefully to make a smoother texture. I hope that you enjoy painting and drawing your insect, and I look forward to seeing what you make.